On this channel, we've talked a lot about this currency reset, this monetary reset. In fact, we've had many new monetary systems over the course of history. And in this video, we're going to break down from Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money. This is actually how I first started teaching my wife more about the financial system is, we'd have a glass of wine and do a dinner date, and we would watch Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money. And today we're going to be discussing that with one of my good friends, Mr. Steve Penny. And he's going to be breaking down some of the signs that Mike talks about for the different stages of an empire. Steve's going to be breaking down how they're manifesting in our everyday life right now in this currency reset and this great devaluation, this race to the bottom that we find many governments are in. So just want to say a quick shout out to our channel sponsor, which is Vizsla Silver. Be sure to check out Vizsla Silver if you're looking for a mining stock. Now, Steve is the creator of Silver Chartist. He's a regular contributor to our channel and probably one of my favorite researchers on macroeconomics and gold and silver. He has a fantastic free newsletter. It's called Silver Chartist. I highly recommend that. In the description, right there down below, you could sign up for free to get updates on gold, silver, mining stocks. And be sure to check out Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money. We'll actually link to the episode that Steve's going to be referring to a bit here in this. That's in the description as well. Give us a comment down below and let us know if you love Mike Maloney and his channel. And let's dive right into this, Steve.
Hey, Jake, how's it going, brother?
It's going good. It's going good. You're excited about this topic, aren't you?
I am, yeah. And I'm laughing here as you talked about watching this with your wife, because I did the same thing with my wife when this series first came out, I don't know, 7-8 years ago. And my wife, I don't know about your wife, but she's really not into financial stuff. But, she found this interesting. That's how, how good these videos are. So I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen them yet.
Now, a lot of times when I talk about the reset on this channel, people will say, yeah, I understand it's coming, but what are the signs that it's coming? And I think that's how, in the flow of our conversation, I might have told you that, hey, a lot of viewers are asking this. And you said, I think it's summarized great in the 7 stages of empire. So give us an idea of where we are at right now and what these stages of empire or these signs of the shift in the monetary system are taking place.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And this is such a great topic because these cycles repeat throughout history, just over and over and over again, going back thousands of years. And the framework that Mike lays out here, it's textbook, and you can just see it happening over and over again. And we're clearly right in here, I would say, in stage 6, which is loss of faith. Loss of faith, not only in the currency, but in the institutions around us. We're seeing loss of faith in many institutions. And I think that's where we are now. And then the final stage is a currency crisis prior to the cycles restarting. So I think that's where we are now. We're starting to lose faith in our currency and in institutions.
One of the ways that seems very evident that we could, as a collective, kind of lose faith, as you're suggesting, is I think if everyday people that don't care about the monetary system, that maybe would have even considered this type of channel too fringe, this conversation too fringe, or, gold is full of conspiracy theorists. Well, one of the ways that loss of faith or that question mark in one's mind can occur is when you significantly can buy less, whether it's with your salary, whether it's with your unemployment check, whether it's with your consistent money that's coming in. When it starts buying you less due to inflation truly manifesting, that's when you get to an interesting stage. And I kind of feel like we're getting close to that. Would you agree?
I would 100%. And it's maybe not as obvious like when you just look at the last year or two, although certainly our prices are, our currency is losing value. But I think back to like my grandfather. He's the hardest working man I've ever known. He was a high school janitor for his full-time job. And then he painted houses on the side. So he worked like six days a week, 12-hour days. And on a janitor's salary, he owned a house. He supported a family of 5. His wife, my grandma, didn't work. And, they were never rich, but they had everything they needed. They avoided debt. And you could do that back then. Well, why? Because the currency had more purchasing power. So you go back, like fast forward to today, you can't support a family on a janitor's salary because the currency is losing value. And this trend is just beginning to accelerate.
And then what happens next?
Well, it's the last phase here. David Morgan likes to say 90% of the move happens in the last 10% of the time. And it's hard to predict exactly when because it's a psychological phenomenon here at the last part. Loss of faith, that's a psychological thing. We've already seen the inflation. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. Rising prices and money velocity are a symptom of the inflation that's already been created. And I think we're clearly headed towards that very soon here. And with people are realizing the only way to get ahead is by speculating right now. The old model of like saving and investing conservatively, I mean, maybe that'll work over the very long term, but we're seeing this rise in all these speculative assets like Bitcoin, like tech stocks. Well, it's just a matter of time before that money flows into silver, gold, and commodities. But I think the rise in speculation is just another sign of people are realizing saving money is it's not going to pay off because they see it losing value, even though they may not fully understand inflation.
Then what happens when the psychological phenomena becomes more known, or a majority of people start to notice it or feel it? What moves from there? What comes across? Because this is a really interesting stage that you discussed from the hidden secrets of money, but I've noticed it right now in everyday life. For me, I obviously, I love gold, I love silver, I have a whole channel on all this stuff.
Mhm.
But in my business, I still do like to keep a capital padding in dollars in my business. But it's made me start thinking more about it too. So what's the result of this phenomena?
Well, I think here's a question every single person needs to ask themselves, regardless if you're bullish on silver and gold, or maybe you're just new to this. Here's a reality that every single person needs to realize that's coming. The government is coming to a decision point where they're going to have to choose between letting inflation run out of control or pricking the everything bubble. That's coming because the debts, the unfunded contingent liabilities, are mathematically impossible to be repaid. It's impossible to repay our debts and obligations in today's dollars without massive currency creation and inflation. The alternative is that we can allow these bubbles to pop. The Fed can stop monetizing all of this debt, and then the government would be forced to tell pensioners, Social Security recipients, military pensions, all that, hey, you know what? Sorry, the money's not here. You're going to have to take a huge haircut. They're not going to do that, of course. So the only other viable alternative is inflation. So that's coming, and now is the time to prepare for that. Right now, like we're seeing the signs. Even silver and gold are just starting to take off here. There's early signs that things are about to accelerate, if not maybe in the weeks ahead, but certainly in the months and years ahead.
So you said there's only two choices at this stage, where you talked about how the final stage is a currency crisis. And that's always seemed a little, we talked about it on this channel, but it seems very far fetched to a lot of people. Yet we're at this point where you really are starting to see it is one of two choices. And whereas before, inflation was always, even Warren Buffett, I believe, called people like us kooks that believed money printing would cause inflation. And he said in the last couple of weeks, he's actually come out publicly and said, "Yeah, inflation's here, and we're seeing it in lots of different things with our businesses." And I never watch the news. I don't even have TV. I mean, I have a TV, but it's just connected for a movie. And so I haven't seen the news in 4 months. But I went over to my grandma's house, to my wife's grandma. She hits the news on, the first word I heard was inflation. And I said, "Whoa, I've never heard that on the TV before."
Yep, it's becoming more mainstream. And you're referring to Warren Buffett's quarterly conference call from Berkshire Hathaway. Yeah, and inflation was the major theme there. And in fact, inflation expectations right now are at multi-year highs. I think most recent survey I saw was the general public's expecting 4.7% year over year inflation, which is obviously above the Fed's 2% target. So that's another just sign that the public is waking up, their inflation expectations. That's a psychological indicator. And when people expect inflation, that's when that monetary velocity is likely to pick up, and we're likely to start to see the result of inflation in rising prices.
How do you how do you make inflation stop, right? Because now even the Fed said it's 4.2% or whatever, which is huge for them to say something like that, obviously knowing the things that they leave off on the CPI. But that's a big number. And then you think, well, how do you stop it? I've had guests that have come on the show and they've said that they believe that it'll get out of control. Therefore, the Fed is actually going to raise rates. But you said there's one of two choices. And the latter choice, if they raise rates, they would, quote, prick the everything bubble. And so, what are your expectations for how they will respond? And what happens if inflation goes, if it's at 4%, that means it's really at 10. So, what if we get 10 and then the next quarter it's 10 again, then it's 10 again? And before you know, what happens at that point?
That's the $1 million question right there that you just asked. You can get the smartest PhD economist in the world who can come up with all kinds of smart sounding theories and big words, but they're not going to have an answer to that question because the choice to fight inflation is to raise interest rates. But if you raise interest rates, you're going to collapse the economy. There's no two ways around that. Now, look, they're going to try other things. They're going to try to jawbone, they're going to maybe talk about raising rates without actually doing it to try and reset the psychology of the public, to tamp down that monetary velocity. But when it comes down to it, there's not going to be anything they can do. They're going to have to choose between inflation or pricking the bubble, and or bringing in a new monetary system, which I think is coming at some point.
So, what happens at the end of the 7 stages? Is that when the new monetary system occurs? You just said that a moment ago. So does after the 7 stages, then the new monetary system occurs?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because we've all heard it said that currencies return to their intrinsic value, which in our case, in modern day society, is zero. So it's paper currency or digital currency. So the intrinsic value is zero. But that'll probably be interrupted, and there'll probably be some kind of new monetary system before we reach runaway hyperinflation, like the crazy hyperinflation that we saw in Germany, in Weimar Germany. So I think a new system is coming, but I think we're going to see massive inflation ahead of time. And what's important to know is that in all depressions and recessions, whether they're deflationary or inflationary, wealth is not destroyed; it's transferred. So these are sad times because most people lose money and they get hurt. However, if you understand what's happening, you can position yourself to be on the receiving end of a wealth transfer. So if we had a deflationary depression like we had in the 30s, that wealth is transferred to people who have cash, and it goes away from people who had tangible assets. That's how, like, the Rockefellers and all these big names, they bought up half the real estate in New York City because they had cash in advance because they saw what was coming. Well, this time it's going to be an inflationary depression. So the losers are going to be people who hold paper assets, people who hold debt instruments, and the winners are going to be people who hold tangible assets. So now is the time. Commodities have never been more out of favor in going back decades. So the environment is ripe here to make a lot of money in commodities, and I think silver, gold, and uranium stand to benefit the most.
And when you say that the wealth is merely transferred, how do you see that playing out? You said an inflationary depression. What does that mean?
Well, uh, so when I say wealth is transferred, what I mean is purchasing power, the amount of stuff you can buy. So, if you own an acre of farmland, that's probably going to have more purchasing power in an inflationary environment going forward, or any tangible asset. If you own claims on oil stocks, precious metals, commodities, the amount of things that you'll be able to buy for your shares of ownership in those assets is going to go up. And at some point, these things will become overvalued. It's just all part of the cycles, and then we can trade them back for the undervalued assets.
And this leads many people to gold and silver, and that's something that you've spent your time researching and have devoted your life to. Now, what do you think happens in an environment like this for gold and for silver? We've been waiting for the type of response, and now just in the last few weeks, we've had a flood of this information on inflation and more money printing. What happens with gold and silver during these 7 stages?
Yeah. So, we tend to, especially, and I totally sympathize with this. Most of us who are still in the rat race, we've got jobs and we just want some freedom. We focus on the monetary aspect, but really, this is the gold and silver and the financial aspect is just a smaller part of a bigger series of events that's happening here. And stage 6 here is loss of faith in institutions, which, by the way, is a core tenet of the principles of the fourth turning, that book by Neil Howe and Strauss, I think his name is. Loss of faith in institutions. And what happens is people tend to turn on each other. You see rise in civil unrest. You see the war cycle begin to peak. So, the economic part of this is only a small part. And unfortunately, having gold and silver is not like a panacea. It's not going to solve all your problems. It will help you, but there's other things we should be doing. We should be becoming more resilient. We should be avoiding consumer debt. We should be creating multiple streams of income if we can.
It's been interesting to watch people the last few weeks, in my opinion. You had Warren Buffett talk about inflation. Mark Cuban, who I had on the show in the very early stages, and he's I asked him, would you, if you became president, would you get rid of the Fed? And he kind of said, why? Like he wasn't for that. But in the last few weeks, I don't know if it's inflation, if it's a move in cryptocurrency, but he said, we need to do something so we don't lose our reserve currency status. So I've noticed it seems like it's becoming more people are realizing there's a problem than even 6 months ago, is how I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. By the way, I must have missed that interview you did with Mark Cuban. I'm gonna have to go back and listen.
Oh yeah, I interviewed Mark Cuban in the early stages of the channel. Awesome. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. I thought I'd listened to all the episodes. I'll have to go back and find that one. But
yeah, you're slacking.
Yeah. It's interesting that someone like that, because he tends to be somewhat mainstream. So it's interesting that he's talking about even mentioning the dollar as the world's reserve currency. But
I think he did it in a tweet like 3 days ago or something like that. It's just another example of many of people seeming to realize there's a problem with our money now. Mm-hmm. With as in honor of Mike Maloney, obviously, since we're talking about him, I'll correct myself and I'll say in the honor, I will say people are realizing there's something wrong with our currency, not our money. And that's, I guess, then my question is just what happens when a lot of people have that occur?
Yeah, that's when things start to accelerate. It falls into that whole 90% of the move in the last 10% of the time. And we're seeing that. People, I've been at this for a long time, going back to like 2008, talking about silver and gold. Until the last couple of years here, I'd talk about silver. No one wanted to hear about it. Now all of a sudden, there's people like they're interested. They're just starting to wake up. We've got the Wall Street silver movement bringing a lot of awareness to the millennials and younger generation. So I think people are starting to wake up, and maybe a little bit of a pivot here, but a little bit of a tangent. But part of what happens here, you talk about the world reserve currency, is unfortunately the end of empires tend to end in war. And, we hate to see that. It's not a fun thing to talk about. But, that's how the dollar has kept its world reserve currency status. We came off of the gold standard in 1971. Go back to 1944. That's what gave us the world reserve currency status. We were tied to the US dollar was tied to gold, and every other currency was pegged to the dollar. So the dollar was the anchor because the dollar was anchored to gold. Now, fast forward to 1971, Nixon took us off of that gold standard. Now, for the first time in all of history, every global currency in the world is free floating. It's fiat. It's not tied to anything. That's never happened before in the world. There's always been at least some currencies that are tied to commodities or gold and silver. So for a few years that's when we saw the runaway inflation in the early 70s. But then the US came up with the petrodollar system. Nixon sent Henry Kissinger, good old Henry Kissinger, over to Saudi Arabia, of all places, to work out a deal where, hey, they'll only sell their oil in dollars. And in return, we protect them with our military. And then they take the proceeds of those dollars and cycle them back into treasuries to keep our interest rates artificially low. Well, and anyone who tries to depart from that is quickly met with military action. So, that's probably a trend that's going to continue. That's something we should probably do another show on and talk about more. But, you've got now China is the biggest importer of oil in the world. And I could easily see, instead of the petrodollar, the petro yuan. And that's likely to involve military conflict. Not to get too off on a tangent there, but I just wanted to mention that briefly because it fits in with the 7 stages.
Well, yeah, like you said, it's at the end of the 7. Side note, Harry Kissinger, he's like the Mahatma Gandhi of our generation. It makes perfect sense what you're saying there. We are starting to see more and more action in the Middle East. And you're saying that this is what throughout history, this is a way they re-preserve the demand for dollars, or what do you mean by that?
Exactly. Yeah. So other nations that are rising, China, think Russia, um, they would love to have this status as world reserve currency because they call it the exorbitant privilege. By having the world reserve currency, you can create currency units out of thin air, export them to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world works hard to produce all of their stuff, and then they send us the fruits of their labor. Pretty good deal for the nation who has that world reserve currency status. So, China and Russia want that. They would love to have oil, the chief commodity, priced in their currency. And, I think history suggests people are willing to go to war over such things.
When you say 90% of the move in the last 10% of the time, or what you were saying, explain that all to me here.
So like in the 1970s is the last bull market. I think that's probably very similar to how this bull market's going to unfold. So that bull market started in 1971 when we came off the gold standard, and gold and silver had risen steadily. And I think it was mid 1978, if I remember correctly, there was a gut-wrenching pullback. Silver fell by roughly 50%, if memory serves me correctly. Gold fell by a lot. And then in that final, call it 18 months, that may not be exact, but roughly 18 months, silver went up, something like 7, 8, 9-fold, maybe 10-fold in the last 18 months. So the biggest gains happened in the last shortest period of time. And that's typically how bull markets work, especially in commodities and especially silver and gold. So that's where I think, we can see a steady rise towards, say, $50 silver, but really the big moves happen quickly after that.
It retraced by 50% and then it went up 9x. Is that what you said, in 18 months?
Yep, exactly right. And that's why they call it a bull market, because a bull market tries to shake loose as many people as possible. How many people who've been riding that bull market for 8, 9 years, like, hey, you know what? I'm up 4 or 5x. Now it's starting to roll over. I'm done. They missed out on that last 90% move.
Have you heard of the story of the Chinese bamboo tree?
No.
It's a story often used in motivational seminars, personal development seminars. And so you plant it, but it doesn't pop through the soil for 5 years. And then in 5 years, it grows the entire time above ground that it would have if it was growing just piece by piece, year after year. And so they use it as kind of an example of like quantum growth or quantum leap. And it's kind of a similar thing. I really didn't realize the significance of that 9 to 10 type of ratio that you're saying. And would you say that type of scenario could happen even more so given the amount of currency units in creation, and now given the number of people that seem to start to be waking up to this currency crisis? Could the quantum leap, instead of the linear, we like to think it goes up 10% year after year, but that quantum leap, could it be stronger this time?
Yeah, absolutely. What a great analogy. Yeah, I've never heard of that before, but that's a perfect analogy for what we're talking about here. And you mentioned linear versus exponential. Our human minds are wired to think in linear fashion. And we can't really go back 5 years to project 5 years forward because things are happening at an exponential pace right now. I think everyone would agree with that. Even the generalist mainstream person is going to agree. Things are happening at an exponential rate. So I think that's likely to happen with our monetary system right now. The pace of change is accelerating.
How do you decide right now versus 18 months ago how much of an allocation to physical metals you should have, right? Like, everything that makes one want to own physical gold or silver is clearly playing out in a huge form right now. You are a proponent of both. How has your philosophy changed or grown? And where is it at right now, given what's taking place?
So I'll just be really transparent. I don't like to be sensational, and I try and be even keeled, but my sense of urgency has never been higher. And take that for what you want, for the people listening. But I feel like there needs to be a little bit of a sense of urgency here. And I'll give an analogy for how I might think about it. If you think of gold and silver as fire insurance, maybe you said, I think 2 or 3 years ago, maybe you're thinking about buying fire insurance, but there's no fires in sight. Well, maybe now, imagine the fire insurance just went up a little bit in price, but you can see the fire. It's just over the hill. But you're saying, I don't want to buy the insurance now. It went up by 20%. Well, the insurance is actually cheaper now than it was 3 years ago. I mean, you can see the fire. It's right there. I mean, anyone who has eyes to see and ears to hear should see what's coming. And, if you don't, then, that's fine. But if you see what's coming, the next, what people don't do is take action. A lot of people know what they should do, but don't do it. So like, if you don't own any silver and gold, but you see what's happening, you might want to reconsider that.
So, for everyone listening, if you want to join Silver Chartist, the link to that is right there down below for a free newsletter to the Silver Chartist by Steve. We'll link Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money, the 7 stages of the empire, right there down below. Now, let's wrap this up with this, Steve. This final question. The 7 stages are happening. We're at the currency crisis stage, or getting close to it at least. How would you summarize they said, Steve, through your old job at the military, we're going to put you on national TV, PSA out to 300 million people in the world. We're going to give you 120 seconds to prepare them. What are you going to tell them?
Well, I'm going to tell them, now is the time to get your house in order. So look at the landscape that you see. How do you see the next 5 years unfolding? And what do you think you should be doing that you're not currently doing? These are questions to ask yourself. It's going to be a different answer for every person. I think some generic answers are, owning some physical silver and gold. That's part of it. But what else? If you see inflation coming, why not buy some consumer goods now? We see disruptions in the supply chains coming. Why not have some of the consumer staples that are only going to go up in price? You got some closet space, put those away. If you have a passion, something you're passionate about, why not create a side hustle, serve other people, and make some extra money on the side, create multiple streams of income. If you've got a bunch of consumer debt, now is the time to consider, paying that down. You don't want anything weighing you down heading into the environment we're heading in. And, I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer. Like I said before, we can prosper in this environment, but what helps you to do that is knowledge, and then taking that knowledge and applying it. And that's called wisdom. And I think that's something we can all do.
Powerful. That was awesome stuff, especially the multiple sources of income. Obviously, a conversation you and I have had many times on this channel. Now, this sense of urgency, in a lot of ways, it becomes a creative force that actually can improve our life, our finances, our health, all of these things, if we can channel that energy correctly. Now, if you enjoyed this and you want to channel that energy correctly to participate in this big wealth transfer, make sure you sign up to the Silver Chartist right there down below for free in the description and pinned to the comments right there down below. Make sure you hit the like button on this video to send it out into the YouTube universe so more people see it. Subscribe and bell notification to get notified for future videos. And I want to thank you for coming on today, Steve, and sharing your wisdom.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.